Hi class, my name is Professor Trembath, and today I'll be talking to you about the impact of European colonialism on today's society. I'm a writing instructor here at American, and I teach research and writing, and I conduct research and writing. Most of my research is in European colonialism and its effect on American slavery, but it's also on American education about those topics. So here in my workspace, I have a whole bunch of textbooks that might be just like your high school textbooks. I might even have your high school textbooks here. And I study the degree to which the way things happened matches what we're taught in high school. I'm going to conduct this lesson with a little bit of information but a lot of questioning. So I'm going to ask you to pause every now and then and consider these questions. To what degree were you educated in high school on the effect of global imperialism? If you're like my students, you weren't educated very much on it. What was the narrative that you learned about the closely connected topics in American and global history? If you're like most of my students, you saw one side of the situation as good and the other side was absent or marginalized. So imperialism has to do with the way certain countries take over other countries in order to take control of their wealth, their land, and the people. And in my research, I take a look at how England, France, Portugal, Spain, Holland, and Belgium, and a few other countries, Italy to a degree, Germany to a degree, took over most of Asia, most of Latin America, all of Africa, and what's now the United States. This map right here shows just what was the part of the British Empire. We know that America was once a part of the British Empire, but so was this much of the world. This map shows Africa and the countries that took control of its wealth. Pause for a minute and take a look at these questions for consideration. These might be things that you'll research in the future. So just a little bit of information on what was taken from Africa to support European and American economic growth during the colonial era. There was, of course, land and people and all these products. What you're seeing on the screen here is from my research. And if you take a look at it, you can see where our wealth came from. So these are my questions for consideration, things you might want to wonder or even research. Pause me, take a look at them, maybe introduce them into your class discussions. So this is a map of what people used to call the first world, second world, and third world. People no longer call them that. Those are derogatory terms, as people from the poorer countries have resisted those labels. They're now called developing countries. But I wanted you to see the connection between the people who colonized and the people who were colonized and their contemporary status. So as you consider who are the so-called failed states and the so-called third world countries and who are the so-called superpowers, I also want you to take a look back in history and realize that it's not simple. It's not a simple binary, as in certain people were bad and certain people were good. We tend to think of it that way. And while there's overwhelming truth in that, there were always dissenters among Europeans and European Americans. There were always colluders among the countries being taken over. And so we don't want to speak in simple terms of black and white and say the white people did this and the black people did this. We can be very specific, and we can say European imperialists when we mean imperialists, but we can also talk about European dissenters. There were some great people in history who stood up as individuals or as groups and vocalized right from wrong in their country. Some paid heavy prices. There were always revolutionaries and resistances from within the conquered countries, but there were also people who helped out and who gained for themselves at the expense of their people. When you take a look into history, you find some really important people. Take a look at these questions and see what there is to wonder about along these lines. When I was about your age, and I was a sophomore in college, I think, I took a class called Racial and Ethnic Stratification. And this class taught me how people got to this country. There are simple narratives in your high school textbooks about the immigration experience, but the immigration experience is diverse. And a lot of times when you understand what was going on in people's countries of origin and you understand how they got here, you understand a lot about their station in life. Especially in my research with African Americans, I can look at us 5 generations or 4, depending on how you calculate a generation, outside of slavery, and I can see that although 24% of African Americans are middle class and another 20 some percent are working class, that there are a lot of people who are still struggling to get out of that situation of inherited poverty and oppression, and research is backing me up on that. There's a lot of research connecting contemporary social problems in the African American community and slavery. There are a lot of researchers working to change the conditions. One of my favorite works in the Native American community. Her name is Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, and she works on what's called historical trauma. Another one is Joy DeGruy, who works on post-traumatic slave disorder in the African American community. And I wonder, what will your contribution be? Pause and read these questions for consideration. Many of you will be studying foreign policy and international studies, and you may wonder, once you understand the patterns of how our country came to be, how we affected other people with our own imperialism. Another question for consideration is about intersection of race and ethnic hierarchies, class, and other identities, such as sexual orientation. I know that you studied the shooting at Pulse nightclub and are able to make some connections. Also, you should be asking, what can we do to break the patterns of injustice and make the world more just? As you close out this lesson, your facilitator will likely be asking you to analyze key concepts within the context of global events like European colonialism. I hope I've provided you some food for thought in that area. Take care.